This lesson is all about biomes. So our essential question that you will be able to answer by the end of this presentation is, what is a biome? All right, so we'll talk about it and define it in this lecture. All right, so the definition of a biome is simply a large community of organisms that are adapted to a specific climate. So we've already talked about what an ecosystem is. So an ecosystem we think is all the living and non-living things in a particular area. A community is a step down from that. So instead of including all the non-living things, a community is just a group of living organisms in a particular place. And when we're talking about a biome, these living organisms are in this one particular location because of the climate. So climate is really important to a biome. So climate, a lot of people get it confused with the term weather, but climate is more specific than weather. So weather is kind of on a day-to-day basis, what you see when you look out the window. Climate is more over a long period of time. So you can determine a climate by looking at average rainfall or precipitation in a given area, as well as temperature. So a biome is defined by the organisms that live in a specific area due to their climate. So when we're defining biomes, we have to look at temperature and precipitation when we're defining the different types of biomes. So around the world, there are 6 major biomes. So this map is highlighting all the places on land. So biomes are land-based, where you'd find the different biomes. All right. So in the light green up at the top, we have tropical rainforest. There's grasslands in orange. In brown, you'll find deserts. In light green, you find temperate forests. In dark green, you find the biome called taiga. And then in blue, you have the tundra. Right? And then you'll notice that there are also considered non-biome areas. These are mountain zones and the polar ice caps. And the reason they are not considered a biome is because they do not have living organisms where they are. So the polar ice caps are way too cold to support life, and the mountains are such extreme conditions that there's no life found. So we can look at this map and kind of see patterns where you find particular biomes. So notice that desert biomes, are found pretty frequently in places like Africa and Australia. We do have desert out in the western part of the United States. Whereas a biome like taiga is found only in the northern hemisphere, up pretty north, right, near the top of the earth. Same with tundra. Tundra you don't really see anywhere except at the top, the very top of Earth, right? So these different biomes exist in different locations because of their climate, so temperature and precipitation. So we're going to talk specifically about each one. So if we're talking about tropical rainforest, where do we find all that kind of lime green colored area on the map? Well, if we're looking at it, we see a lot of tropical rainforest near the equator. So we need to be thinking about what is the temperature and precipitation like around the equator. Okay. So if we're talking about the tropical rainforest, we're talking about those lush green forests, like shown in the picture at the bottom. They have a really warm temperature all year round. So this graph on the bottom left is what we'd call a climatogram. And a climatogram shows 2 things. It shows the temperature as a line in green, and it shows precipitation as bars in blue. So it's basically 2 graphs in one. So along the bottom, you have the different seasons of the year, or different months of the year. So the first one being January, going all the way through December. And then along the side axis on the left, you have the amount of precipitation measured in millimeters. So how much, rain or snow, depending on what type of precipitation there is. On the right hand axis going up, we have the temperature, and it's in degrees Celsius. So that's important to know that when we're in a science class, we use Celsius and not Fahrenheit to measure temperature. So this data is coming from Brazil. Brazil is a location where there is a tropical rainforest. And the green bar across all the seasons, we can look at the temperature for the entire year. If you notice, the temperature hovers around just below 30 degrees Celsius, which is a very warm temperature. It's in the 80s to 90s year-round. If we look at the rainfall year-round, we see that there's heavy rains from January through about May, and then during what would be our summer seasons, their winter seasons, so from June, July, August, September, rainfall dips down and then starts to go back up in December. But generally, it's rainy all year. So tropical rainforests are places where it's warm all year and it's rainy all year. And that's what gives you those lush green forests. Grasslands are in orange. And again, we find them all around the world. We have a lot of them out west. There's a lot in Africa. There's a lot in kind of Europe, Asia. So what defines them? So grasslands are mostly grass plants. So it's a community of a lot of plants. There are animals, but it's mostly plants. They're characterized by having warm summers but cool winters. So again, if you look at the climatogram for this place, it's Rapid City, South Dakota. It's an example where there is a grassland. And you look at the temperature line, the one in green, throughout the different months, you'll see that in the winter months, like January and February, November and December, the temperature is a lot lower. It's below 0 degrees Celsius. But in the summer months, it gets up to about 20 degrees Celsius. And 20 is hovering right around the 60 degree range. Right? So the temperature swings, there's shifts. So warm summers, cool winters. And then if we look at the rainfall throughout the year, we see that it increases in the months of April, May, June, July, and August. But it's pretty low in the winter months. So it has a pretty rainy spring. So the climate, warm summers, cool winters, and then for rainfall, the rain is mainly in the spring. Deserts are in brown, and again, we can find them almost all over the world. We have the place where you find the most desert is in Africa and in parts of Asia or the Middle East, right? There's significant amount of desert there, as well as in Australia. Australia is mostly desert. So if we look at the climate of deserts, it's very hot temperatures throughout most of the year. If you look at the green bar for this climatogram here, you see that there is an increase in temperatures, obviously in the summer months. In the winter months, it does dip down, but only very slightly. So it's still pretty warm throughout the entire year. In terms of rainfall, it is very dry. There's very little precipitation. In summer months into the fall, it might peak up a little bit, but it's overall very limited rain. And so these climatic conditions really determine what plants and animal life you'll find in a desert. So the plants are a lot hardier, things like cacti, and things that don't need a lot of water are what you'd find in a desert. The temperate forest is in light green, and where you see that, you do not find it south of the equator. For the most part, it's only north of the equator. We have a big chunk of it in the eastern United States, where we are, as well as in Europe, and then parts of Asia. And this is our biome that we live in. So if we think of our biome and its climate, it has really hot summers and cool winters. So you can see that with a pretty big peak in the temperature on the climatogram. And we have a pretty long rainy season. So we don't really have one particular time of year where it's really, really rainy and then others where it's not. We get rain pretty much all year round. And from really about April to September, there's a little bit more rain than normal. Right, so this is the biome we live in. Next, we have taiga, which is in dark green. And again, this one is only found north of the equator. And think of it like northern Canada, parts of Russia. This is where you'd find your taiga. And this biome is characterized being cool pretty much all year round. It does still have some seasons where the summer months are warmer, but the warmest temperature is still a lot cooler than our other biomes. If you look at the precipitation for this biome, it doesn't have a lot. The summer months it does tick up, but in the winter months it's very dry. And this biome is characterized by having very long winters and short summers, right? Because it's cool most of the year. So in this biome you find, lots of those big tall pine trees, things like moose, elk, deer. So some of those bigger kind of northern animals that you're used to seeing if you were to travel up north into like northern Maine, southern Canada. Our final biome is the tundra, shown in the blue, and that is found in very northern, extreme northern places. So for the United States, that does include parts of Alaska, and the very top of Canada, Iceland, parts of Greenland, the very, very tippity top of Russia. And this biome is characterized by having very long winters, approximately 10 months out of the year, and has little to no precipitation at all. So if you look at the temperature on the climatogram, you see that it does have a pretty tall peak in the summer months. However, but if you look, the peak of it in about June, July, August only gets up to 0 degrees Celsius. So even in the summer, 0 degrees Celsius is about 32 Fahrenheit. So that's as warm as it gets. And then in the winter months, it drops down to below minus 20 degrees Celsius. So that's extreme cold. So it's cold year round. And if we look at precipitation, there's almost no precipitation. The summer months, so July, August, September, there's slightly some precipitation, but not a lot. So again, polar ice caps, if we think about the map of the world, they're at the very top and very bottom. So it's not considered a biome because there might be some living organisms like polar bears, but there is no soil, which means there's no plant life. And for it to be considered a community, there needs to be plant and animal life, right? So polar ice caps do not count as a biome. So to recap here, a biome is nothing more than a certain community of plants and animals in a particular place that is determined by the climate. So it's similar to an ecosystem, but in this case, we're not considering, we're actually thinking on a much larger scale. So an ecosystem might be kind of stuck in one place. We have an ecosystem here in East Bridgewater, but we are thinking on a much larger scale. So think of biomes as larger ecosystems characterizing across the entire Earth. All right, so very similar, but we're thinking larger scale when it comes to biomes.